It was great. I'm still recovering a little bit. But yeah, it was really great.
Just in terms of like the jet lag catching up with you?
Yeah. I don't know what it is. I think it's just pure exhaustion that I haven't quite felt this way before. I'm just so exhausted. But it's been great because I just wake up at 7 a.m. now and start my day super early.
I love it. I love waking up early. It's great. It's a hard habit to keep up in the long run. But when you do start waking up early, I'm a 6 a.m. riser myself. You're like, why don't I just do this every day? It's so nice and it's quiet and it's like cool outside.
Yeah, it's true. It is really nice. You're like, oh, I should do this all the time.
I suppose your lifestyle doesn't necessarily afford you the ability to do that. I mean, certainly not when you're playing shows.
Yeah, usually no. Although on tour, that's pretty much tour life, is getting up, burning the candle at both ends.
Just in terms of like getting up and getting into the van or bus. And...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, chasing a bus is means you stay late and wake up early.
You said you weren't used to this specific form of exhaustion. Was this your first European tour?
No, this is actually probably like my fourth tour since the pandemic has started in support of fatigue. But for some reason, it really just hit me on the way back in a way that I hadn't really felt. I'm just very tired.
How have you managed to fit 4 tours in during all of this?
That's a great question. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, it's 4, I guess. Black Midi, Animal Collective, and a run in November. Yeah, and then this one, the Sharon Van Etten.
The album came out it came out last year, is that right?
I think so.
Okay, 2021.
Year of my life.
I know, and even if it wasn't, just all time has gone out the window.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of people about this, about releasing an album during a pandemic, and it must feel, I mean, especially in your case, second record, and a lot of people got really excited about it. I mean, certainly that was the first time I had heard about you, and then it must just feel like kind of like running headlong into a wall and feeling like there's this like excitement around it, but you can't necessarily take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like we've gotten so lucky. We've been taking advantage of everything. We've been like playing so much and doing so much, which is also a really weird cognitive dissonance to know that there's so much going on, but still, we're keeping on, which I guess is on brand with the title of the record.
Is there a sense in which this was a pandemic record?
I think it was, and it wasn't, in the same way that the first record was a grief record and it wasn't. I think, I'd already been thinking about a lot of these themes and ideas before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit and it really kind of solidified a lot and put a lot into focus for me.
There's kind of the thematic answer, but I was also just thinking of it in terms of like, oh, I've suddenly got a lot of time on my hands. I'm suddenly by myself a lot. And once I've sort of, maybe burned through everything on Netflix, it's time to really kind of to get to it and start putting this thing together.
Yeah, no, I mean, the record was mostly done before the pandemic, but the pandemic just gave me a lot of time to tweak endlessly and to think about it a lot. The bulk of it was already done. I actually didn't feel like I could do much of anything during the pandemic that was creative. I wasn't writing lots of songs or doing much of anything really, except, working my job, which I've since left, but I wasn't feeling particularly creative in a musical sense.
Dealing with depression or something else?
Just not depression, just, the enormity of everything, just not really feeling like I had space for it or didn't want to make space for it. I'm not sure, but it wasn't really happening in that way. I spent a lot of time cleaning my apartment and, which is also a way of preparing for me, I guess, is, just making sure my space was really clean and getting rid of a lot of equipment that I didn't need and fixing stuff that was broken. And I guess just preparing for, the next phase that I guess I'm now in.
I'm in this one bedroom in Queens, and especially during the pandemic, the clutter really starts to pile up. And, you know, when you do take the time and really focus on like getting things in order and cleaning your apartment, like it can really clear your head. And it's shockingly closely tied to that. I mean, I know it's like metaphorical, but when your apartment or your house is clean, like then you can start focusing on other things.
It's so true. My mom would always say, like, your room reflects your state of mind, and it really does for me. If I'm really frazzled and I feel a little out of control and things are just kind of happening, my space will just be a complete mess, and I won't be able to think. Like, before I practice even, I have to kind of organize my space and put things away.
Has your relationship to making music changed at all? I mean, in the wake of this record specifically, it sounds like it's become your job, or at least like your kind of sole or primary focus in a way that it wasn't previously.
Yeah, I feel like my relationship to music is always very strange and evolving in some way. It is more of a job now, for sure, and also more of a not job, more, I don't want to say hobby, but something else, just because I have just more time in general to kind of focus on it. And yeah, I'm trying to figure out what that means, but it feels right now.
I mean, I think for a lot of people, there's a resistance to frame it that way, because once you consider it a job, and you, like, at very least, you take a little bit of the romance out of it.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I feel like some of the romance was taken out of it when it wasn't a job also. Just really doing everything yourself, and you're just, I don't know, feeling like no one's responding, or you're I don't know. It's just, it's music is hard no matter what, I think.
I know you went to school for it. So, I mean, there must have been a point when it felt like this was something that you really wanted to pursue full time.
I never really had that thought, honestly. I studied it, and you know, when I was studying, it was really just kind of more of a historical approach rather than, you know, like playing. But it never really occurred to me. I never thought that I would be at the point where I am now, where people care and I can play for people and do things and travel. I never ever thought that would be the case. So I think the main thing that has changed is just kind of like coming to terms with being a professional musician, which I would never think of myself as, and still feels weird. Like I had trouble saying that a few seconds ago, because it's just like, me? Really?
I mean, what's your sense of the disconnect there? I mean, why was it something that seemed, I mean, especially somebody coming from a musical family, why did it seem so impossible?
Just because it's hard, and because it wasn't, you know, it's to some degree, it's not really up to me, right? It has, other people have to believe in the work and want to support it. And, that's not something that I felt on like a large scale, or, you know, even a medium scale for a long time, and had, you know, really tried to get my music out there for, you know, as long as I've been making music, and didn't think that it would be possible, just because it's hard. And I, you know, had no intention on stopping making music. I just hadn't thought that it would be a job. And I also didn't know if that was the goal for me necessarily. Like, especially my first record, I had a lot of conversations with the engineer, Andrew Lappin, and we would always say, you know, like, no one's going to like this record, and we don't care. Like, this is what we want to make. And it feels right.
It's a difficult way to go through life, and not knowing whether the audience is going to be there, but maybe there's a sense in which that's kind of liberating.
Oh, it's very liberating, I think. I mean, I at least at this moment, and I hope it continues, I feel like I have a career on my own terms, which is, you know, not everybody has that. And I'm really, really grateful for that. And part of that is because I really have not compromised in any way on anything that I wanted, or wanted to say or wanted to express. And I'm really thankful to have a team that also allows me to do that and supports that and expects that of me, which also is, I never would have expected that either. That's definitely, I'm grateful for that.
Kind of looking at you and your career from the outside and hearing you describe some of the kind of the journey that you went on to get here, it sounds like part of it was really that like you yourself had to figure out exactly what it was that you wanted to do. I mean, musically specifically, as somebody who was playing classical music on the piano or the recorder and then went through kind of a rock phase and, decided to pick up the bass. Like a lot of it was really sort of that journey of finding your own voice.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel like the voice part was kind of the easy part in some ways, where my friends would kind of joke that everything goes through the Taja filter, where, a lot of the songs that I'm working on now, for example, are things that I wrote in high school and alongside things that I wrote like a week ago, and they feel really cohesive together. But it's more that, I just had a lot of things going on and had a lot of different interests, and we're trying to, just navigating that, but it all kind of like came together through me in some way. I think part of the difficulty was just really, I guess, figuring out how to package that or how to like message that or communicate that to other people. Like that's the part that really does not come naturally to me at all. I just know how to do the doing. I
guess the packaging is, at least in a certain sense, what I'm getting at as well. I had a guest on the show and he actually turned me on to your music, and when I listened to it, I mean, the thing that really struck me is that there's not a lot of context for it when you go and listen. And it's like, it's so different, but in a kind of a really, in a beautiful way. I mean, that is something, right? That's something that takes time. That's something that that you have to hone over time.
Yeah, I think so. But for me, it actually feels a little bit like the opposite, where I feel like I'm constantly chasing this moment of being a teenager, and the things that I would make when I was like 16 and just didn't know any better and didn't know that I was making something weird. I was just making what I wanted to make and wanting to feel that sense of freedom. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm trying to like unlearn a lot of stuff and go backwards to those moments, because sometimes I listen to those demos and I'm just like, man, what was I thinking? Like I thought that I could do that. Like that's so strange.
Is there a sense though in which you had to actually learn those things in order to unlearn them? Yeah. I know that's like a completely abstract question, but as somebody who also comes from the art world and somebody, especially jazz, appreciates jazz, there's a technical proficiency required to get yourself outside of it.
Yeah. I actually feel like I have some regret about not learning enough or not being like technical enough. Like I feel like all the things I do are really kind of visceral and immediate. And so I was able to circumvent a lot. Like a lot of the songs I would make early on came from mistakes I would make when I was practicing piano. So it was kind of like anti-technique in a way.
What's that process like of going back and, and rediscovering that music from, so many years ago?
It's a mess because I have no archiving system.
Just like literally in terms of like how it exists in the world.
Yeah, it's weird. It's, it's just a mess of audio files at this point. I have no system for going through anything. And I have, I as a part of my practice, I just record audio in my environment. So I have a lot of that along with a lot of demos. And then there's like different versions, and they're all just kind of swimming on a hard drive. And I kind of have my own internal systems for like, I know what the names are, and then like the secondary names and the tertiary names and all of that, but it's really just horrible.
Kind of going back and re-engaging with the the older stuff. Is that something that you've come to relatively recently? I mean, was there a period of time when you didn't engage with it at all?
No, it's always on the table and it's always around. It's something that I kind of continually go back to. Time kind of collapses on itself, I guess, when I'm writing, because I'll take stuff from something I made up before bed the last week with something that I have been sitting on for 10 years or something. It all, when the moment is right, the moment is right. But yeah, that's why I also need a better archiving system.
That strikes me as especially difficult to kind of find that through line. It's one thing to go back and listen to it and create something now for it, but to really take these two dissonant pieces, and is it about finding a connection between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of operate on the principle that there are no bad ideas. There's just, you just have to find the right time and the right place and the right way. And so I just keep everything, mostly because I'm afraid that I'll never come up with another idea again. But if I have an archive, then it doesn't matter. And I can always go back to it. So I think, yeah, for me, it's just a matter of recycling, really. And I just want everything to find a home. It's like they're all my little children, and I want them all to be treated well and go out into the world and have a life. And so I keep going back to the things that I haven't used yet to see if it's their moment.
No such thing as a bad idea, but also, I mean, your job in a lot of senses is being a curator, and you come from the world of curation, both in terms of the museum work that you've done. I know you were like me. I know you were a DJ in college, and it's about curation, and it's about, I guess, juxtaposition in a sense, right? Of making sure everything flows together.
Yeah, definitely. That definitely resonates with me.
I guess a lot of it is really just, it is kind of like knowing when to push things to the side.
Yeah, totally. I've tried to not bang my head against a wall. I'll do that up to a point, and if it doesn't work, then I just find something else. Found
sound is a big part of what you do as well. I mean, are you just constantly walking around and recording interesting things in the world?
Well, sometimes I'm on a mission like that, and I really just want to find the right thing, and I'll turn on, a recording device and see what happens. But a lot of the time, it's just I feel inspired by something in my environment, or I hear something that reminds me of something, or if it's an important moment, I'll try to record it. And it's never really to use it in a recording environment ever. I never really go in with that purpose. And when I try to, it usually doesn't work. But, it's really just to remember my life and remember where I am, because the sound will help trigger a lot for me. And it's a way of keeping it more so than photos. I don't, that never really worked for me, but recording audio does. And it helps bring me back to certain moments.
It is an interesting thing. I am constantly taking photos that I never engage with, right? I mean, and that's that's sort of the double-edged sword of digital recording, both audio and visual, is that you go around, you take, millions of photos, and they just sort of and the only end result of it is you have to keep paying more for your iCloud storage over time. Divorced from this idea of going back and using it or incorporating it into the music, how do you re-engage with just sounds?
I listen to them a lot. I'll go back to them, and there's some that I really, really love that I'll listen to a lot. And usually when that starts happening, that's when the gears start turning, and I'm like, okay, maybe this is something that could belong in a song or on a record in some way. But I do listen to them quite a bit, and I have a pretty good sense of what's there. But it's always really funny because I do it at different moments, and I listen. There's hundreds, probably thousands of these recordings, and I go through them every once in a while, and depending on the day and my mood, they might sound completely different, and it's almost like I never heard them before, or something will be triggered in me where I'm like, oh, wait, I need to use this for this, or this reminds me of this other thing. And so it's always somehow new, which is really exciting for me.
You listen to sound like just, I guess, in the way that most people engage with music. Is that fair to say?
I mean, it's usually maybe, maybe.
Trying to picture you, like the environment that you're sitting in, like, you know, are you on the train? Are you just like sitting at home with your laptop? Like, how are you re-engaging the sound?
Sometimes it's on the train. Sometimes, you know, if I'm about to start a recording project, sometimes I'll that's usually a moment when I'll go back through things and see what's there and try to flag things and star things that are really interesting to me.
There's a lot of intentionality there, right? I mean, it's different. It's different when you're like, oh, it's time, you know, I'm putting this record together and I need to like see what can go on it, to just be like, hey, like, you know, I'm just going through my life and that thing I heard 3 months ago, I want to hear again.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think I mean, I do also just kind of listen to it every once in a while. Like there are some that if I record something that's really, really like touches me in some way, I'll listen to that for like weeks straight, and just kind of try to wrap my mind around it or think about it or just listen to it if I really, really like it.
Especially during these extremely difficult last few years. And what sounds have given you comfort?
It's mostly conversations. I have to take a lot of cars for because I can't drive, and to
live in New York City, you know, it's
to get to gigs, that's how it works. But I'll record conversations sometimes with some of the drivers because it always fascinates me how you can have really intimate conversations with someone you don't know, and I feel like that actually happens in New York a lot. And it happens really quickly. And then all of a sudden I'm in this space that I really didn't expect to be in. And so I'll record a lot of those conversations and I'll listen back to them a lot. I've never really used them for anything. But I listen back to them because some of them are just really, really incredible.
That's more like listening to a podcast than listening to music, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's all kind of the same to me. They're all just files on my phone.
Do they know they're being recorded, or do you tell them that or do you just kind of sneakily turn the recorder on in the back?
No, they don't. They don't know. And that's also because I don't intend on using them for anything except just to listen to them. And then once it becomes something else, then, you know, that becomes a real moral thing for me. And that's probably part of the reason why I haven't used any of those in particular. But, you know, it gets hairy when you do things in this way, you know. So, and I don't want anyone to feel disrespected or, taken advantage of or anything like that. At the point that they're being used, people know.
That's totally fair. And, you know, and it's one of those things, right? It's like Heisenberg uncertainty principle of like, people just act differently when they know they're being recorded. Yeah. Or they're like performative in a way they wouldn't be otherwise.
Totally. I mean, when I record myself, even I try, and I know that I'm doing it, I kind of try to like trick myself or, you know, keep it on for a really long time so that I kind of forget that it's rolling. So I get to another place. But I'm also, I've been doing it with myself for so long that it's kind of easy to kind of just be myself with everything recording, but it is slightly different.
You mean in terms of when you're making music?
Well, yeah. If I'm making music or if I'm just kind of like around in the house, sometimes I'll just like record myself or, you know, just kind of all things that I do. Or if I'm in the shower, sometimes I'll just like record myself singing in the shower or like I record all kinds of things.
Your job as a musician is really being an editor, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like music is written just living life. And at the times that I sit down, it's just kind of like it just is happening. And then I just kind of make choices or I edit things down.
In the sense that to actually sort of like, if you were to sit down and play an instrument, it's very deliberate in a way that it wouldn't be if you were just sort of recording yourself casually.
Yeah, but I do, you know, I grew up studying music in a very specific kind of way. And I think once I started writing my own music, I realized that I didn't really want to be alone at an instrument all the time. And so I don't know. I think I really do think of like my life as the moments when the music is actually being written, and then I sit down and then just kind of like comes out. But I don't think of the moments where I'm by myself at my computer, even though they're the more deliberate moments, as the moments when the music is being made. In my mind, it's like it's being made when I'm with people and when I'm enjoying life, or when I'm not enjoying life, or, whatever.
Obviously, one of the upsides of it is you get to make your own hours, but the downside of that specifically is that there's a sense in which you're kind of always on the clock, right? There, even if you are somebody who makes music in a more deliberate way, everybody's got an iPhone on them now, and people sort of like sing something, or like when an idea comes into their head. Can it be harder for you to engage with the world if that's always kind of in the back of your head?
I think about that less in terms of the creation of music and more just with everything else. But it also just feels like kind of the flip side of a coin that I already had in my pocket somehow. Because as a curator, I also feel like, artists would call me sometimes at like 9 p.m. or on Saturdays and Sundays, or I was always working on Saturdays and Sundays too. And, in the evenings during the week. So and that was because artists are always kind of working whenever they're working. So I feel like it's just kind of like the flip side of that kind of life that I already knew and was accustomed to, but now I feel a little bit more control over it in a way. Yeah, I don't know.
I had a cartoonist on the show years ago, and she was doing a lot of memoir strips at the time, and she was actually doing a daily one to talk about like feeling obligated to, at the end of the day, like to have something. And she told me that because of that, there is this long period in her life where she was thinking about all of her interactions in terms of being a 3-panel comic.
Yeah.
There's a way in which, like, if you don't, and I guess, like, in a sense, I'm kind of going through this too, right? As somebody who used to go into an office and now lives at home, like, it becomes really hard to separate the two, and it becomes hard for you to kind of clock out maybe and live your life if, like, there's always this notion that, like, you should be mining some of this for art or for music.
Yeah, that's true. I think right now I'm kind of leaning into that confusion because I feel like I'm maybe on a path toward trying to find more structure in my life. Like, I know that that's something that I want and need in terms of, when I make music and how I do it and what sort of, like, business I take care of pertaining to music during the day and things like that. Which is something that I had a lot of growing up and really, like, loved and wanted, and then ran away from. And now I feel like I'm running back toward structure in some way. So I know that's, like, this is part of the path, is like the really confusing moment of not knowing when to turn things off and on. And then eventually, hopefully, I'll, settle into some kind of schedule.
You had more structure as far as classical training?
Yeah, or just, like, as a kid, you also just have more structure in general, but I loved it. I loved having, like, this happens at this time, and I was very busy, so I had a lot of things to schedule. And then really, really, really hated it, and now I'm kind of at a point where I'm hoping to return to more of a routine, even for things that don't pertain to music. Like, I'm starting to explore an interest in meditation, for example, and, like, would love to find time to meditate every day for 10 minutes. And would love to find time to do, like, something every day. I don't know. I think there's something very beautiful about having something that you return to continually at a specific time, or I don't know, something about, like, having a regimen is really appealing to me.
I go in and out with meditation, as probably a lot of people do, but I started again recently. I started taking anti-anxiety medication, and I found that has helped tremendously, because You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I suspect, having read interviews that you've done and listened to interviews with you, that you have a similar problem to me.
Anxiety? I have a lot of anxiety.
Well, anxiety, but also specific, and we can get to that, but also specifically the issue of like living in your own head.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely live in my own head.
Is that a plus or minus when it comes to making art?
I think it's both, definitely, in equal measure. I don't think I would make the work that I make if I didn't, to some degree. And I know that's something about me that's sometimes really positive and really great. I think it's helped me to develop a sound that really feels like it belongs to me. And that's something I want to continue, and something that I take pride in. But also, it makes it hard to connect with other people and to feel normal and to have relationships and things like that. So, you know, it's a give and take. I feel like tour really kind of exacerbates that in a way, because it's like, you know, this world that has existed in my head is now like has a physical location and people are responding to that thing. But also tour can be like so alienating in a lot of ways.
How so?
It's just hard. I think you're around
Sure.
a lot of people, but you know,
like you're never not around people too is the issue.
Yeah, you're never not around people. There's no real consistency. It's very easy to feel extremely lonely, even though there are like a lot of people that are there and are responding to the music and love it and are really receptive and kind. But at the same time, it's like also extremely, extremely lonely and alienating in a lot of ways.
To a large extent, it's self-selecting, right? I mean, in terms of the people who you choose to be in your band, for example, right? I mean, you know, and I assume partially because of the success in this record that you're able to choose them maybe in a way that you weren't able to before, and you're able to sort of like to build those relationships and figure out like who you can probably get along with for an extended period of time on the road. And then obviously the people who are like coming out to listen to your music specifically, there's clearly some kind of a common bond there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the number one priority for me is always to play with people that I love and am friends with. And so that's kind of always the thing. Like I'm lucky enough to have friends that are really incredible musicians and seem to like playing my music.
There's always that doubt.
Like, really? You want to play this? Like, are you sure?
I think you're confident. And I think like, you know, that like, I'm not confident, but I think you're confident that you're making something really interesting and perhaps good, but there's always that doubt. Is it just the worry that like, that this could just go away at any time?
Oh, I'm not confident in anything. I really, every day I wake up and I'm like, really? People are listening to this thing? That's
just the act of putting something out into the world. Like not everyone does that. Not everyone can do that.
Yeah, that's true. There is some belief in there. But it's also like, I don't know what else to do. I guess it's just sort of like an instinct or a reflex. Like sharing music just feels like the right thing. But I don't take any of it for granted. And I am extremely aware that like all of this could go away tomorrow for any number of reasons. And, you know, I didn't expect any of this to begin with. I told you I released this first record and I was pretty sure no one would listen to it. And I was okay with that because I just wanted to release it. And now I've like, you know, kind of hit a lot of goals for myself that I never thought I would ever realistically be able to reach. So now the rest is gravy. Now it's kind of easier. It's like, okay, I've achieved the list of things that I always wanted to, but didn't think I would. So now I just get to have fun.
You say you didn't know what else to do, but I mean, obviously like you're somebody who has found success outside of music. Because you were working for PS1, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a big deal. That's a big deal art museum, and being a curator there is a big deal. So it's not that, when you say you didn't know what else to do, it's not that you didn't have other options. You had plenty of options.
Yeah, that's true. It's more less like a practical thing, more of like, the impulse to make music and to share it with other people is something that I will always have. If there's whether there's 0 people listening or there's 100 people listening or 1,000, that's just something I feel like I have always had, and I can't imagine not having. I guess that's kind of what I meant.
It sounds like there was a long period where you made a lot of music and you didn't share it with people.
Yeah, well, it's more that I made it and shared it, but it's hard to figure out how to tap into any kind of larger network than the network of your friends, right? That's something that is still kind of a mystery to me, to be perfectly honest. How to find an audience outside of the people that and you meet, one-on-one. And so I was making a lot of music and I was playing a lot of shows and doing what I could, but I couldn't really figure that part of it out. And I still don't really understand it. And so I think it's still something that is it mystifies me, and is also just I'm so grateful for, because I don't understand it and because it's something that I really wanted for such a long time, which also just comes out of a desire for community and connection at its base level. That's the best part of playing shows for me, is really just looking at people and having conversations with other people, especially as someone that lives in my head, that's when that really happens for me and feels really genuine and real. So, I'm on stage and connecting with people through music. That's when, that just feels right.
You have, but I mean, you're from here. I mean, you've lived in New York. I mean, I know you went to college outside of the city, but you basically lived in New York your entire life. Has there always been that sense of community? I mean, have you always been able to kind of find that group of people who are doing something, if not doing something similar to you, or at least are interested in what you're doing and want to collaborate with you?
I feel that's always kind of been a struggle for me in some ways. I've always had a community of people, be it one person. I had a close friend in high school who I would, just walk around the hallways and we would just harmonize together. And that was my person. And, I've always had someone like that around, and I'm really grateful for that. But, in moments where I've tried to grow that community, that's often felt hard for me or difficult for me. And even now, I have tons of friends that make music and are musicians and are awesome, but collaborating is always very hard for me. And I guess really, really finding a sense of community is sometimes hard for me. And I think that's probably part of the reason why I'm interested in being a curator and why I opened up my home for shows and did all of those things, is sort of trying to really just find that, or if I can't find it for myself, to foster it with other people and between other people too. But that's me being pessimistic. I've always had community in some way, but but I don't know. It's hard. New York is hard. I didn't realize it was hard until very recently.
Just when you started doing music full time, or when did it get hard in a way it wasn't before?
Well, I didn't know anything else really. So, I New York is a small town, and in a lot of ways that, people talk about their small town in the Midwest, and sometimes a lot of their experiences really feel like things that I have experienced also. It's also really, really not. And there's a lot of competition and energy and things happening. And I don't think I was as sensitive to it because, I'm just a fish in water. Now I know a little bit more. And yeah, it is sometimes hard to find community. I remember when I was first going to DIY shows as, a high schooler, because those are the only shows that I could really get into. And I would, I wanted to be friends with the bands that were playing, and I wanted to be involved in putting together the shows, and I just really couldn't find my way and felt like kind of ostracized and alienated. Not like anyone was like actively mean to me. It's just like I couldn't like figure out how to be involved in a real way. And that was sort of like, my formative musical years in terms of like trying to be an artist and trying to put together shows and play, make records and stuff like that. But
you look back on these things that you went through, and to a certain extent you realize like, oh, I was doing that to myself. The reason why it was hard for me to connect with other people is because I was making it hard. I've been through that before too, where it's just like, I've like gone through periods of like whatever, like depression or something else. And it was just like, a lot of that is a product of kind of living in your own head and like, perceiving whether it's like slights or, assuming that people are judging you because all you can do is think about that. And that really, I mean, that's something where meditation has helped me is quieting some of that and just like letting an experience happen and just like letting people engage with you on their own terms.
Part of it, I definitely feel like I've made up, and part of it, I think, was a real feeling of not belonging, also because of like the sort of stuff I was making.
When you're going out of your way to make something that's difficult to define, like there is a sense in which you are like making it more difficult for people to, if not connect with you, at least like find you.
Yeah, for sure. And, the people I was meeting, I think we had a lot of the same reference points, but it just like came out in a very different kind of way. So, I was sending music to a lot of people and they were like, I don't know what to do with this at all.
You mentioned playing with Animal Collective before, like, and I've heard you discuss that as somebody who, maybe an influence, or at least like somebody that you were really interested in. And I think there is this like this beautiful thing in music of, people coming from like really different approaches but still like finding those through points. Right. And like, I mean, there are a lot of senses in which the music that you make is very different than the music that Animal Collective makes, but like, it also makes perfect sense to me that you would open for them.
Yeah. There was a funny moment on the very last day of tour, and we were all kind of hanging out and eating and talking. And Dave came up to me and he was like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, there's basically like there's a lot of the samples from Songtongs were taken in Crown Heights. And that was a really insane moment for me because that's, what I had been doing in the same exact neighborhood at a very different time. And we had this connection that I wouldn't have expected and didn't know about at all. And just like the way that we're making things, there are lots of connections for sure, but that was like a really specific one that really kind of blew me away a little bit.
You're from there, obviously, and your family's from there. Did he give you a sense of like what drew them there?
I think it's just proximity. And I think, some of them must have been living around there at some point, but I don't want to get the history wrong or anything like that. But yeah, that was very funny for me.
And that does kind of get back to that idea of being a fish in water, as you said, of just being, I mean, you're surrounded by sounds here. I think about this a lot because I'm from San Francisco originally. I went to school in Santa Cruz, which is just like, I don't know if you've ever been, but it's the middle of the forest, basically. It's like the redwood forest. And I came out here and I was living here for a few years. And I remember that experience of like first going back and realizing, hadn't occurred to me at all, but realizing like, oh, there's been a period of several years where I've not experienced complete darkness and I've not experienced complete silence. Because there's so many people and there's so much stuff going on that it's easy to kind of to disconnect from it. And I don't know, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but it sounds like a lot of what you do is finding a way to kind of re-engage with some of those sounds.
Yeah, I guess in a way. I mean, I've never really felt disengaged from my environment in a way. It's more just a way to keep those moments closer to me and to really, really remember them. I think now in the past like month or so, I'm feeling now, after another tour and things like that, I'm feeling like, okay, like, what am I doing here? Or that's like an extremely, extremely recent feeling or wonder. And that also just comes more out of an interest in nature that I never really had before.
You feel like for the first time in your life, you're thinking about leaving?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a thought that every New Yorker has at some point, and then it's sort of like, no, but I could never.
I would go out of my mind after like a month of living outside.
Yeah, totally. And, this will always be home, but it is an interesting thought prompt always that, maybe I'll make moves on at some point. But it's like, where else could I live? Where else could I go? And that kind of comes back to the small townness of New York. Like, I know a lot of people that have only been here and have never left. And that New York is literally all they know. And I'm kind of one of them, like that in a lot of ways. And I don't necessarily want to be like that forever.
Because I'm not from here, that like I've had the exact opposite experience where it's like, I don't know a lot of people from here. And it seems like nobody here is from here.
Yeah. I mean, totally. Every time I see another New Yorker, there's just kind of like a real understanding and immediate respect. Yeah, there's a lot of things that just like go unsaid that you all of a sudden know and understand, and it's a special thing.
Yeah, I think part of it too is because I have something similar. I mean, I don't tour in the way you tour, but I travel a lot for work, and there's always a part of me that wonders if I could live here, but like wherever I'm at, and you get to sort of vicariously like live in different places for a short period of time and like almost try them on for size.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. I always look up the price of everything where I am and see how expensive it is to live there and what different neighborhoods are, and just kind of try it on for a little bit and see.
Why is collaboration so difficult for you?
Because I'm really stubborn and I have a lot of opinions, and that's made me a really bad bandmate in the past. And I don't think I really realized how much I had to say and how much I wanted to say. And it's also, part of my musical upbringing is like, it's pretty solo. That's not entirely true. I've played in like groups and things like that. But in terms of like musical education or playing and lessons and things like that, or like classical music at the very least, has been a very solo endeavor for the most part for me. And so, the thought of like sharing music with people or playing with people and being vulnerable in that way is really, really hard for me. And also because, I feel like I live here, so it's like hard for me to like really communicate all the things that I want to do. So, the collaborators that I do keep, I try to keep them around as much as I can. And why I also like playing with friends instead of, random people. That's
an impulse I'm trying to be better about, of having something very specific in my mind of the way that something should be, and then trying to like outsource or have somebody else to do it, and not getting frustrated and just doing it myself, because I know that I could like hew like more closely to what's in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like, the record process is also collaborative, like it all kind of like starts with me and me by myself for the most part. But, Andrew Lappin was the engineer. We were talking over text the other day, and he was saying that the process of making the records is sort of like being on a train and going through a tunnel. and being in complete darkness and then seeing the light and just going toward the light. And I thought that was actually a really great way of putting it, because we're all just kind of like, you know, like I have things in my head and then sometimes it's just not the right thing. And we end up finding something else, or Andrew has an idea, or Ben Chapiteau-Katz, the music director for the project, like ends up having another idea or something, you know? So it is collaborative to a point. It is, I mean, not to a point, it's very collaborative.
Isn't there a sense in which you're kind of collaborating with, you know, your 13-year-old self?
Yeah, totally. I hope so. That's always like confusing to me in the moment where, you know, I always have this dilemma of like, do I preserve this thing as it is, or do I preserve this thing as it is, or do I make it something new?
Yeah, obviously you found success with this last record, and success that you didn't expect to have. And I find, understandably, with a lot of musicians and artists in general, that, you know, there's an impulse to just keep doing it that way because you had success that way. But are you trying to do it differently? I mean, are you trying out new things, or do you feel like the process of making the next record is going to be fairly close to fatigue?
I think, you know, everything kind of goes through the Taja filter, as I was kind of saying before. But you know, the whole point of this to me is to work through things that are really difficult for me, and to keep finding new things that are difficult and figure them out.
Like emotionally difficult to...
Yeah. So like finding new things, working through the old things, and also just like the whole point is kind of to surprise myself. So yeah, it's going to sound like me because that's just what I do. But it's only worth it to me if I can kind of find ways to try something new, because that's kind of the whole point of this whole thing. If I'm not surprising myself, then it's not worth it.